The terminal went quiet in under 3 seconds. One moment, Gate 14 at Harlow International was the usual chaos. Rolling luggage, crying toddlers, a gate agent announcing final boarding. The next, two airport security officers were pulling a woman out of the jetway by her arm, her carry-on dragging behind her, one wheel catching on the threshold and spinning uselessly in the air. Passengers pressed against the windows. A child asked her mother what the lady did wrong. Nobody answered. The woman didn't scream. She didn't struggle. She walked with them because she'd been trained to stay calm in situations far worse than this. Situations where screaming would get someone killed. Her name was Amelia Voss. She was 34 years old. She was a nurse. And she was the last person those security officers should have put their hands on. Because within 72 hours, her name would be in front of a federal task force. A $5.2 billion government contract would be frozen, and every executive at Harlow Air would be searching for an exit that didn't exist. If this story moves you, stay until the end. Like this video, and drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Every city matters. Every name in that comment section tells me you were here. Amelia had been awake for 19 hours when she boarded Flight 408. That wasn't unusual for her. She'd spent 6 years in military trauma units running on less, on coffee and adrenaline, and the particular kind of focus that comes from knowing that if you lose concentration, someone dies on the table in front of you. 19 hours was nothing. She could function at 19 hours. She was less sure she could function at the level of bureaucratic nonsense she'd encountered in the 14 months since leaving the Army and taking a civilian nursing position at Callaway Regional Medical Center in Drennon, Colorado. The job was supposed to be simpler, less blood, less urgency, more regular hours, a salary with benefits, an apartment with a real bed instead of a cot. What she hadn't anticipated was that civilian hospitals had their own kind of war. Slower, quieter, but grinding in a way combat never was, because at least in a forward operating base, everyone knew what the enemy looked like. At Callaway Regional, the enemy wore a lanyard and smiled at you in meetings. She'd taken 2 weeks of personal leave, the first real leave she'd taken since transitioning out. The plan was Washington. Her sister Prue had a spare room in her apartment in the Claremont neighborhood, a dog named Biscuit, who was terrified of staircases, and the kind of easy companionship Amelia hadn't let herself need in years. 2 weeks. Then back to Drennon, back to the unit, back to whatever version of herself she was still figuring out how to be in a world that didn't need her the same way the Army had. She'd used her travel voucher, a benefit attached to her veteran status, to book a first-class seat. She'd hesitated over it. It felt indulgent. But her left knee had been giving her trouble since the incident in Bashar Province 3 years ago, and she knew that 4 hours in a middle seat in coach with her leg bent at the wrong angle meant she'd be limping by the time she landed. So she'd booked the upgrade and told herself she'd earned it. She got to the gate early. She always got everywhere early. That was military-grade punctuality still embedded in her nervous system. She sat in the boarding area with a cup of airport coffee that tasted like hot regret, scrolled through 3 days of text messages she owed replies to, and waited. Boarding went fine. She found her seat, 3A, window, stowed her carry-on with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd packed and unpacked under fire, and settled in. The seat next to her was empty. The flight was maybe 3/4 full. The flight attendant, a man in his 50s with silver hair and the kind of practiced warmth that came from 20 years of doing this, asked if she wanted a pre-departure beverage. She asked for water. He brought it without making her feel like an imposition. She closed her eyes. She wasn't asleep. She couldn't sleep on planes, never had. But she was doing the things she'd learned to do in the field, resting while remaining aware. Heart rate down, breathing slow, listening to the ambient noise of the cabin filling up. She didn't hear what happened 2 rows back. She heard the aftermath. A woman's voice, loud with the kind of performance that's designed to be overheard. "I'm telling you, she's been watching me since the gate. I don't feel safe." A pause. A lower voice, male, placating. Then, "I'd like to speak to someone. Officially." Amelia didn't open her eyes. She had no reason to think it was about her. 40 seconds later, the silver-haired flight attendant appeared at her row. His warmth was still there, but it had a layer of discomfort underneath it now, something he was working to keep professional. "Ms. Voss? I'm sorry to bother you, Could I ask you to come with me for just a moment? She opened her eyes. Is there a medical situation? No, ma'am. It's... There's been a concern raised. I'm sure it's nothing, but the captain has asked that we... What kind of concern? He lowered his voice. Another passenger. She's indicated that she feels uncomfortable. We just need to ask you a few questions. Protocol. She looked at him for a moment. He had the grace to look slightly ashamed of himself. She got up. The woman 2 rows back was in her late 40s, expensively dressed, with the particular brand of certainty that comes from having been told you matter often enough that you've stopped questioning it. She didn't look at Amelia directly. She looked at the flight attendant, as if Amelia were a problem to be managed rather than a person standing 3 feet away. At the back of the plane, near the galley, the flight attendant explained in careful language that didn't explain anything. Another passenger had expressed concern. They were required to take all concern seriously. Could Amelia describe her reason for travel? I'm visiting my sister, Amelia said, in Washington. I have a return ticket for the 14th. And your ID? You checked it at the gate. The gate. Yes, of course, He stopped, looked at his hands. I'm sorry, Ms. Voss. I'm going to need to call the ground team. She should have pushed back harder, right there. She knew that later. She should have asked exactly what the accusation was, demanded it in specific language, made them articulate the thing they were doing so they had to hear themselves say it. Instead, she waited because she'd been trained that escalating before you understand the full situation is how people get hurt, and she applied that training now, even though the situation didn't warrant it. 2 airport security officers boarded, not airline staff, Harlow International's own security team, in charcoal uniforms with the airport's logo on the chest. One was tall, early 30s, with the flat effect of someone who'd decided not to think too hard about their job. The other was younger, maybe 25, and kept looking at his colleague to calibrate how serious to be. Ms. Voss, the taller one, we're going to need you to come with us. Why? A complaint has been filed. What's the complaint? We'll discuss that off the aircraft. I'd like to discuss it here. Something in his posture shifted, not threatening, but resolute in the way that's designed to move a situation forward by sheer insistence. Ma'am, we need you to come with us. If you'll collect your belongings, I haven't been told what I'm accused of. We'll go over everything at the security office. The cabin had gone quiet. Amelia was aware of it, the way 140 people suddenly found reasons to stare at their armrests or their phones while also watching everything. She looked at the officer and calculated the situation the way she'd calculated 1,000 situations before. What do I actually win by standing here versus what happens if I move? She got her bag. She walked off the plane. She kept her face neutral, her shoulders level, her gait unhurried. She'd been in rooms where the wrong body language got people shot. She knew how to move through conflict without handing it fuel. In the jetway, the younger officer took her carry-on without asking. She let him. He was nervous. She could tell by the way he held it, too carefully, like it might mean something. The security office was a fluorescent-lit room near the D-concourse checkpoint, furnished with the same institutional indifference as every other airport security space she'd ever seen. A desk, 3 chairs, a camera mounted in the corner, a printed sign on the wall about the authority of TSA personnel that nobody ever read. The taller officer, his name tag said Briggs, sat across from her. The younger one stood near the door. So, Briggs said, tell me about your travel plans today. I already told your colleague I'm visiting my sister in Washington. And your occupation? Nurse. I work at Callaway Regional Medical Center in Drennan, Colorado. Before that? She looked at him. Before that, I was in the Army. Doing what? Medical Corps. Trauma nursing in forward operating environments. Briggs wrote something down, or pretended to. She couldn't tell from across the desk whether his pen was actually moving. And the woman who filed the complaint says you were watching her, making her uncomfortable. I closed my eyes for most of the boarding process. She says you made eye contact multiple times in the gate area. I was sitting in a boarding area with 100 other people. I probably looked at everyone. She felt threatened. Amelia breathed. One slow, deliberate breath, not because she needed to calm down, but because she understood that how she responded in the next 10 seconds was going to determine how long she spent in this room. I understand that she said that. I'm asking you what specifically I did that constitutes a security concern. She felt uncomfortable. That's not a security concern. That's a feeling. Briggs looked up. Ma'am, I'm not being difficult. I'm asking you to tell me, specifically, what policy I violated that justifies removing me from a flight I paid for. He set his pen down. The airline has the right to refuse service to anyone whose presence is deemed by whom, based on what criteria, and under what oversight. She wasn't raising her voice. That was the thing that seemed to be throwing him. He'd been trained to manage confrontation, and she wasn't giving him confrontation. She was giving him questions, calm and precise, the kind that required real answers. And real answers were something this room wasn't equipped to produce. We're going to need to hold your travel document while we complete the review, Briggs said. You're going to take my ID? Standard procedure for no. She said it simply, no heat in it. That's not standard procedure for anything. You don't have the authority to confiscate a civilian's identification document without a law enforcement hold, and you're not law enforcement. You're private airport security. If you're asserting that I've committed a crime, then I'd like to speak with an actual police officer. If you're not, then I'll take my bag and my boarding pass and we can figure out if there's a later flight. The younger officer by the door shifted his weight. Briggs stared at her. What happened next was the thing that Amelia would later describe as the moment the situation stopped being about a misunderstanding. A third person entered the room. She was in her 40s, corporate polished, with a Harlow Air employee badge clipped to her blazer. The kind of badge that had a gold stripe, which Amelia had learned in the last 20 minutes, meant management. Her name was Darla Fitch, and she introduced herself as the station manager. Ms. Voss, Fitch said, with the exact tone of someone who has decided the outcome before walking into the room. I want to assure you that Harlow Air takes all passenger concerns very seriously. We've reviewed your travel record and we're prepared to rebook you on a later service. There's a flight at 6:15 that has availability, and we'll, of course, offer a travel credit for the inconvenience. I don't want a travel credit. We understand this has been frustrating. What I want, Amelia said, is to know who authorized the decision to remove me from that flight, what documentation exists to justify it, and what complaint resolution process is available to me. Fitch smiled with her mouth only. Our customer service team would be happy to walk you through that process. I'd like the answer now. I'm afraid I'm not in a position to. Then I'd like the name of the person who is. A pause. Fitch glanced at Briggs. Something passed between them that Amelia couldn't read exactly, but recognized the shape of the silent negotiation of people who've made a decision they're not certain they can defend and are trying to figure out how much the other person actually knows. I'd also like my carry-on returned, Amelia said. Officer. She looked at the younger one. You've been holding it for 22 minutes. He looked at Briggs. Briggs nodded. The bag was set down beside Amelia's chair. She'd missed her flight. She could see that on the departures board through the office's narrow window. 408 had pushed back from the gate. It was gone. 3 hours of driving to get to Harlow International, a 4 a.m. Wake you up, 19 hours of accumulated exhaustion, and it was gone because a woman 2 rows back had felt a feeling, and a security team had decided that feeling was worth more than her boarding pass. She pulled out her phone. She texted Prue. Flight issues. Explain later. Don't worry. Then she opened her email and began typing a message to Callaway Regional's HR department. Not because HR could help her, but because she'd learned years ago that the first thing you do when something happens is document that it happened, in writing, with a timestamp. Fitch was still talking. Something about the 6:15 flight, something about priority boarding as a gesture of goodwill. Amelia let the words wash past her and kept typing. Ms. Voss, Fitch's voice had shifted slightly. I want you to understand that this is not a reflection of, can I ask you something? Amelia looked up from her phone. Of course. The woman who made the complaint. Did anyone ask her what specifically she observed, or did she just describe how she felt, and that was considered sufficient? Fitch's smile held, but only barely. We take all concerns. I know, very seriously. Amelia stood up. She was taller than she looked when seated, and she was aware of the way the room recalibrated slightly at the fact of her standing. I'm going to need a written record of what happened today. The time I was removed from the aircraft, the name of the passenger who filed the complaint, the name of the officer who made the removal decision, and the specific policy cited as justification. I'd like that documentation before I leave this terminal. I can have our customer service team, the documentation, not a brochure, not a voucher, the documentation. Fitch looked at her for a long moment. I'll see what I can do, she said finally, with the tone of someone who has decided to let time solve the problem. Amelia nodded. She picked up her bag. She walked out of the security office into the corridor, found a seat near a charging station, and sat down. Her left knee ached. Her coffee from 3 hours ago had been cold before she finished it. She thought about Prue's spare room, about the dog named Biscuit, about the particular kind of tired that isn't really about sleep. Then she opened her laptop and started writing. Not a complaint form, not a social media post, a full incident report. The kind she'd written hundreds of times in the field when you needed to create a record that would survive scrutiny, that would hold up 6 months later when everyone's memory had gotten convenient. Times, names, exact quotes where she could recall them. A description of the physical space, the chain of authority as she'd observed it. She formatted it the way her CO had taught her. Chronological, first person, no editorializing, nothing that could be dismissed as emotional. She was 40 minutes into it when her phone rang. Unknown number, Washington area code. She answered. Is this Amelia Voss? Man's voice, professional cadence, efficient. Speaking. My name is Terrence Obie. I work for the Office of Inspector General, Department of Transportation. I'm calling because your name appeared in a flagged incident report from Harlow International Airport, filed approximately 35 minutes ago by a member of airport operations staff. A pause. Ms. Voss, do you have a few minutes to talk? She looked at the departures board. The 6:15 flight to Washington was still showing on time. I have quite a few minutes, she said. Terrence Obie's voice was precise and unhurried, the voice of someone used to conducting conversations that mattered. He explained that there was a standing federal review of Harlow Air's passenger removal policies, that it was ongoing, it was not public yet, and that 3 incidents in the past 8 months had generated internal flags within the DOT's oversight structure. He did not say anything that constituted an official statement. He was careful about that. But he asked her carefully whether she'd be willing to provide a written account of what had happened today, which could be entered into the review file. I was already writing one, she said. Good. A brief silence. Ms. Voss, your military record, is that something you're comfortable with being part of the context here? She thought about that. Not about whether to share it. That was straightforward. She was thinking about what it meant that he'd already found it. DOT investigators didn't typically pull military service records in the first hour of a passenger removal incident. That meant someone had flagged her name against a database, which meant the incident report that had gone up the chain in 35 minutes had gone further up than she'd expected. You already know what's in it, she said. Some, Obie said. I'd like to hear it from you. She looked out through the terminal windows at the tarmac. A ground crew was fueling a plane. Ordinary work. The kind that happened whether or not any of this was happening. 6 years Army Nurse Corps, she said. Trauma specialty. 2 deployments, the first in Oberstan, the second in the Kale Valley. Forward surgical unit, mass casualty protocols, aeromedical evacuation. I came out a captain. I've been civilian for 14 months. She paused. And before you ask, no, I wasn't watching that woman. I closed my eyes. I was trying not to fall asleep. I believe you, Obie said. That's not the point. The point is whether it matters. He was quiet for a moment. Ms. Voss, the airline that removed you today is 3 weeks from signing a federal services contract. $5.2 billion. Maintenance, ground infrastructure, 7 regional airports. The DOT's review of their passenger conduct policies is directly tied to the contract approval. Another pause. The incident today. It has implications beyond what happened to you. Amelia sat with that for a moment. The terminal moved around her. A family dragging a stroller, a businessman on his phone, 2 teenagers sharing earbuds, living their lives in the ordinary way that lives get lived in the margins of airports. What do you need from me? She asked. Right now? That written account. We may need more later. How much more? Potentially a formal deposition, potentially a meeting with the oversight team. He paused again. I want to be transparent with you. This will not be quiet. If you enter this process, it will not stay in a file somewhere. The airline will know you've cooperated. Their legal team will respond. She thought of the room she'd just left. The fluorescent light, Briggs and his non-moving pen, Fitch and her travel credits and her smile that didn't reach anything. "Send me the form," she said. She ended the call. Outside, a plane was lifting off the runway. Not her flight, some other flight, rising into the gray Colorado afternoon and becoming something small, and then nothing against the clouds. She watched it until it was gone. Her laptop was still open. The incident report was at 1,400 words. She scrolled back to the top, read the first paragraph, made 2 small corrections, and kept going. She didn't know yet what Terrence Obie hadn't told her on that call, that the DOT review wasn't the only thing in motion, that the incident report filed from Harlow International's operations center had been seen by someone who shouldn't have had access to it yet, and that by the time she boarded the 6:15 flight, 3 people in the Harlow Air executive suite were already on calls with their attorneys. She didn't know that the woman who'd made the complaint, a woman named Petra Galt, who was the wife of a Harlow Air board member, had made a phone call of her own 40 minutes ago to the airline's VP of Corporate Relations. She didn't know any of that yet. What she knew was that her knee hurt, her coffee was gone, and she had a report to finish. She typed the next line, and the cursor blinked, and somewhere on the other side of the terminal, a gate agent began calling out seat numbers for a flight that wasn't hers yet, and the afternoon moved forward in the way that afternoons do, indifferent, unhurried, carrying all of them with it, whether they were ready or not. Her phone buzzed. A text from Prue. "What kind of flight issues? Are you okay?" She started to type, "I'm fine," which was mostly true. Then she deleted it and typed, "I got pulled off my flight. It's a whole thing. I'll explain when I get there. I'm still coming. 3 dots. Then, do you need me to call someone?" She almost smiled. Prue had been asking her that for years, across every crisis, large and small. "Do you need me to call someone?" As if there were always a person, a single correct person, whose intervention could fix the thing that was broken. It was a very Prue response. It was a response that assumed the world was fundamentally fixable if you just reached the right person in time. Amelia typed back, "No. I think the right people are already calling." She looked at her screen. Her report was at 1,600 words. There was a lot still to write, and the 6:15 wasn't boarding for another 90 minutes, and her knee would feel better if she walked. And somewhere 3 floors above her in Harlow Air's regional operations office, a phone was ringing that nobody in that building was going to want to answer. She saved the document. She stood up. She began to walk. She walked the length of Concourse D twice before her knee told her to stop. It wasn't a dramatic pain, nothing sharp, nothing that dropped her mid-stride. Just the familiar dull pressure below the kneecap, the one that showed up when she'd been on her feet too long or sitting in the wrong position for too many hours. The one the Army orthopedist at Fort Cavell had told her was manageable as long as she didn't do anything stupid. She'd done plenty of stupid things since then, just not the kind that involved her knee, so she found a row of seats near a charging station and sat back down, and her laptop was still open, and the report was still at 1,600 words, and she added 900 more before the gate agent at D17 started calling for the 6:15. She boarded last. Not deliberately. She'd just lost track of time in the document. The same silver-haired flight attendant wasn't on this one. Nobody recognized her. She was just a woman with a carry-on and a window seat, which was exactly what she'd wanted to be 4 hours ago. She didn't sleep on the flight. She finished the report somewhere over Kansas, read it twice, made herself cut 3 paragraphs that were more frustration than fact, and emailed the final version to Terrence Obie at 7:48 p.m. Then she closed the laptop and watched the darkness outside her window and thought about Petra Galt. That name had taken her 11 minutes to find, which was longer than it should have taken because she'd started with the wrong search terms. She'd been looking for board members' spouses first, then cross-referenced with Harlow Air's publicly listed corporate governance page, then a Denver Society column that had run a piece on a charity gala 8 months ago with a photo caption that included the name Petra Galt alongside her husband, Warren Galt, who served on the Harlow Air Board as Independent Director for Regulatory Affairs. Regulatory Affairs. She'd stared at that for a moment. The particular irony of it sat in her chest like a stone. She didn't include it in the report. Obie hadn't asked for speculation, and she didn't deal in speculation. but she'd screenshot the photo and the caption and the gala guest list and put them in a separate folder on her desktop labeled simply context, the way she'd learned to keep things that were true but not yet useful. Things you held on to not because you were certain they mattered, but because you'd been wrong before about what mattered, and you'd learned from that. Washington was cold when she landed, colder than Denver had been, with the particular damp cold of the East Coast in autumn that gets into your joints and stays there. Prue was waiting at arrivals with a coat over her arm and an expression that was trying very hard not to be worried. "You look terrible," Prue said, which was her version of "I love you and I'm glad you're here." "Thanks for that." Amelia took the coat. It was Prue's old pea coat, dark green, and it smelled like the apartment she'd grown up visiting, like old books and whoever's coffee had soaked into the kitchen walls. She put it on. "Are you going to tell me what happened?" In the car. Prue had a 15-year-old sedan with a cracked dashboard and a heating system that worked on its own terms. They sat in it in the parking structure with the engine running while Amelia talked. She didn't tell it dramatically. She told it the way she told everything, in sequence, with the relevant facts, without editorializing. Prue listened without interrupting, which was unusual for Prue, which meant she understood this was serious. When Amelia finished, Prue was quiet for a moment. "So they pulled you off the plane because some woman felt like looking at you?" "That's the short version." "And now there's a federal review?" "There was already a federal review. I'm apparently now part of it." Prue turned the heat up. The car made a sound like it was considering the request. "What does that mean for you?" "I don't know yet. Obi said potentially a deposition, maybe more." "Amelia." Prue's voice had gone flat, which was how Prue's voice went when she was about to say something she'd been holding back. "You just got out. You just started actually sleeping. You just got an apartment that has furniture in it. Is this really—" "It's already started," Amelia said. "I'm already in it. The question isn't whether to do it. The question is how." Prue looked at her. Outside, a taxi was honking at something. The parking structure echoed it back twice. "You're going to go at them, aren't you?" "I'm going to tell the truth. Whatever that does is what it does." Prue put the car in reverse. "Okay," she said. "We're stopping for food first. You can change the world on a full stomach." Obi called at 7:20 the next morning, while Amelia was standing at Prue's kitchen counter drinking real coffee. Not airport coffee, actual coffee, freshly ground, the kind Prue had always been ridiculous about in a way that Amelia had teased her for, until she'd spent 6 years on forward operating bases, drinking whatever came out of a urn that nobody cleaned, after which she had completely revised her position. "I read your report," Obi said. "It's thorough. It's accurate." "Both." A pause. "I want to loop you in on something. We're moving faster than I indicated yesterday. The incident at Harlow International isn't the only thing that happened. There was another removal. LaGrange Airport, Nashville route, 2 days ago. Different passenger, same profile of complaint. A woman, traveling alone, reported by another passenger for making them feel uncomfortable. She was asked to leave the gate area. No refund, no documentation provided." Amelia set down her coffee. Same airline, same station manager classification. And the passenger in Nashville, she's a pediatric nurse practitioner, 22 years in clinical practice. The number sat between them on the phone line. 2 incidents in 3 days, Amelia said. 3 in 8 months, if you count February. The February incident was different. A man was removed. There's a separate pattern there. But the common thread is the complaint mechanism. Harlow Air's protocol for handling passenger complaints doesn't require the complaint to be specific. It doesn't require the complainant to describe an action, only to describe a feeling. And the policy says the airline will respond to any expressed discomfort that could affect the safety or comfort of the flight. That's an almost unlimited authorization. "Yes," Obi said. "It is." She could hear him flipping something on the other end. Actual paper, which surprised her. She'd expected him to be entirely digital. The contract review board meets in 11 days. The $5.2 billion package goes through final approval at that meeting unless the review team files an objection. My office is preparing that objection, but formal objections require specific documented incidents, not general patterns. Yesterday's incident at Harlow International gives us a third data point and potentially a named complainant. He paused. "Ms. Voss, I need to ask you something, and I need you to understand it's a real question, not a procedural one." "Ask." Are you prepared for what comes after you say yes to this formally? Not the deposition. What comes after? The airline's legal team, the press, the people at your hospital who are going to hear your name attached to a federal complaint against a major carrier. A beat. I've seen people go into this thinking they're just providing a statement, and 6 weeks later they're managing a situation they didn't know they'd signed up for. She looked out Prue's kitchen window. A small backyard, dormant grass. A bird feeder that needed refilling. Biscuit, the dog, was sitting at the glass door looking out at something only he could see. When I was in the Kale Valley, she said, there was a mass casualty event. 15 casualties in under 4 minutes. We had 3 nurses on shift and a surgeon who was on his way back from another unit. One of my nurses, her name was Delgado, she'd been in for 2 years. She froze. Not because she was incompetent, because the scale of it hit her at once, and her brain just stopped for about 45 seconds. She paused. I didn't have 45 seconds to help her process it. I gave her the most immediate task I could, pressure on one wound, just that, and we moved. And she came back online, because the job in front of her was specific enough to hold on to. Another pause. I'm telling you that because I don't do well with abstract fear. Tell me the specific things, and I'll tell you if I can handle them. Obi was quiet for a moment. Then he said, all right, specific things. The airline will file a counter-characterization of the incident. Their legal team will argue that their staff followed protocol and that you were treated consistent with their policy. They will not apologize in any document where it could constitute an admission. They will likely request access to your personnel record to establish whether your military history included any disciplinary incidents that could be used to complicate your character credibility. There's one letter of reprimand in my file, 2019. I refused to transfer a patient who wasn't stable enough to transport against a colonel's order. The patient survived. The letter's still there. That will come up. I know. And your current employer, Callaway Regional. If this becomes public, and it likely will within the timeline we're working in, your hospital's PR situation becomes complicated. There will be reporters calling. People may form opinions about whether a nurse who's in the middle of a federal complaint is the right person to be treating patients. She thought about the unit, about her supervisor, a thorough and occasionally exhausting woman named Dr. Renata Voss, who ran the floor with the efficiency of someone who'd designed the schedule herself and considered it a personal affront when anything deviated from it. She thought about her colleagues, Marcus, who brought in bad breakfast burritos every Friday and was genuinely excellent at patient intake. Jory, who was 26 and still learning how to deliver bad news without her voice shaking. The orderly whose name she always forgot and who always remembered how she took her coffee. I'll talk to my supervisor, she said. Before anything goes public, she should hear it from me. That's the right call. Obi paused. Ms. Voss, I want to be clear about one more thing. This review is happening with or without your formal participation. The pattern is documented. The contract decision is in motion. Your statement makes the case stronger, but the case exists. I'm not asking you to carry this alone. She appreciated that he said it, even if she wasn't sure she entirely believed it. In her experience, the people who said you won't carry this alone were usually not the ones who ended up carrying anything. Send me the formal participation paperwork, she said. I'll sign today. The paperwork came at 10 a.m. By noon, she'd signed it and sent it back. By 2 p.m., she'd called Dr. Renata Voss at Callaway Regional and had the conversation she'd been dreading, which turned out to be less bad than she'd expected and worse than she'd hoped. Voss had listened without interrupting, a trait she shared with Prue, which Amelia noted, and then asked 3 precise questions. Was Amelia a named complainant in an active federal investigation? Was she still required to report to her scheduled shifts? And did this involve anything that reflected on her clinical conduct? Amelia answered, yes, yes, and no. Voss said, I'll need to notify our legal office, not because I'm required to take action, but because when the press calls, and they will call, I need our communications team to already know what they're talking about. A pause. You should have told me sooner. It happened yesterday. I mean the pattern. The situation at the airport wasn't the first time something like that's happened to you, was it? Amelia opened her mouth and then closed it. No, she said. It wasn't. Voss was quiet for a moment. Come back on schedule, do your job. If anyone at this hospital makes your life difficult because of this, You tell me directly. Don't handle it yourself. Another pause. And Amelia, for what it's worth, you're a good nurse. Whatever they say about you in the next few weeks, I know what I see on my floor. She got off the call and sat on Prue's couch for a few minutes, not doing anything, just sitting. Biscuit came and put his chin on her knee, the good one, which she was grateful for, and looked at her with the full sincerity that dogs bring to moments when they don't understand what's happening, but understand that something is. I know, she said. She scratched his ear. He made a sound like he agreed. 3 days later, the story broke. Not through Obi. Not through any leak she could trace to the DOT review. It came from a journalist named Simone Frey at the National Transport Observer, a trade publication that Amelia had never heard of, which covered aviation policy and federal contracting with the specific focus of people who found that genuinely interesting. Frey had apparently been tracking the Harlow air contract review for 6 weeks, had a source inside the DOT who was not Obi, and had received a tip about a quote-unquote incident at Harlow International that she'd spent 72 hours verifying before running it. The piece was careful. It named the airline. It named the contract. It described the incident without naming Amelia. A passenger with a military medical background was removed from a flight following a complaint filed by the spouse of a board member, and it laid out the 3-incident pattern in the kind of clean-sourced language that made it difficult to call inaccurate. It noted that the DOT review was active and that the contract approval meeting was 8 days away. Amelia read it twice at Prue's kitchen table. Frey had done the work. The piece wasn't perfect. There were 2 points where the framing implied correlation that hadn't been proven causal yet, but it was responsible journalism, which she found herself being grateful for in a way that felt slightly absurd, as if responsible journalism were a pleasant surprise rather than a baseline expectation. Her phone started ringing an hour after the piece published online. She didn't answer numbers she didn't recognize. She forwarded 3 voicemails to Obi. She texted her mother, who'd seen something on a news aggregator and was panicking in the particular way her mother panicked, which involved a lot of exclamation points and requests for Amelia to call her back right now. She called her back. It took 20 minutes to explain that she was fine, she was not in legal trouble, she was not going to lose her job, and yes, she was eating. What she didn't do was look at social media, which Prue had advised, and which she followed for almost 6 hours before she looked at social media. That was a mistake. Not because it was uniformly bad. It wasn't. There were people who read Frey's piece and responded with something like anger on her behalf, which felt strange being the subject of other people's anger even when the anger was pointed in the right direction. There were veterans posting about similar experiences, about the particular kind of invisibility that follows you out of uniform. There was a hashtag that she refused to engage with because the hashtag had flattened the whole thing into something that could fit in a line. But there was also the other side of it. People who'd decided, without knowing anything specific, that a complaint must have had some basis, that the airline wouldn't have removed her without a reason, that she was probably exaggerating or attention-seeking, or the one that landed worst, the one that she kept coming back to, that she was using her military background as a shield, weaponizing a service record to make herself untouchable. She put the phone face down on the coffee table and didn't pick it up for 40 minutes. When she picked it up again, there was a message from Obi. Harlow Air legal team has formally requested your personnel file. We expected this. Our office has placed a protective hold pending the scope of the review. You'll receive formal notice by end of day. And below that, from a number she didn't recognize, a Washington area code different from Obi's. Ms. Voss, my name is Bridget Kwan. I'm General Counsel to the Senate Commerce Committee's Aviation Subcommittee. I'd like to speak with you at your earliest convenience. This number is secure. She stared at that for a long moment. The Senate Commerce Committee had no role in the DOT contract review. Their jurisdiction was legislation and oversight. They could hold hearings, they could call witnesses, they could generate the kind of attention that made executives lose sleep and lawyers earn their retainers. Their involvement meant the thing Obi had described as a contract review was becoming something larger, something with a public face and a chamber and people whose job it was to ask questions in front of cameras. She called Prue into the room and showed her the message. Prue read it. Is that bad? I don't know yet. Is it good? Probably not uncomplicated. Prue sat down on the arm of the couch. Biscuit relocated to be between them, which was his default position when the energy in the room changed. What do you want to do? Amelia thought about the fluorescent room at Harlow International, Briggs and his pen, Fitch's travel credits, the way the younger officer had held her carry-on too carefully, like it meant something he hadn't decided yet. She thought about the pediatric nurse in Nashville, 22 years of practice, standing in a gate area being told her presence made someone uncomfortable. I want to call her back, she said. She picked up her phone. She dialed. It rang once. Ms. Voss? Bridget Kwan's voice was quick and direct, the voice of someone who had 11 things happening simultaneously and was giving Amelia the full attention of one of them. Thank you for calling. I'll be brief. The subcommittee chair is considering requesting your testimony at a hearing scheduled for next week. It would be closed session, not public, not televised. The purpose would be to provide the committee with direct testimony about the incident as part of a broader review of federal aviation contractor conduct standards. Next week, Amelia said. The contract approval meeting is in 8 days. Yes. A pause. That timing is not accidental. I see. I want to be direct with you about something. The committee's interest is not in you personally. It's in the pattern the DOT review has identified and what it means for how federal contracts are awarded to carriers with unresolved conduct issues. Your testimony would be one element of a larger picture, but it would be a significant element. Another pause. I'd also tell you that Harlow Air's legal team contacted the committee this morning requesting a meeting. They're moving to get ahead of this. What did the chair say? He told them the committee would be happy to receive any documentation they wished to provide. Her voice was dry enough to suggest she found this mildly amusing. Ms. Voss, I understand this is a lot in a short time. I don't need an answer today, but I do need one by tomorrow morning. I'll call you by 9, Amelia said. She hung up. She looked at Prue. Prue looked at her. Senate testimony, Prue said. Closed session. Still. Yeah. Amelia set the phone down. Her coffee had gone cold again. She had a talent for that, for letting coffee go cold while things happened around it. She looked at it and then left it where it was. I need to think. You've been thinking since yesterday morning. Then I need to think differently. She stood up. The knee didn't protest this time, which she took as a minor mercy. I need to walk. It's 38 degrees. I know. Prue handed her the pea coat off the hook by the door. Amelia put it on and went outside, and the cold hit her like a pressure change, clean and immediate, the kind that clears your head whether you want it to or not. She walked 2 blocks, 3, turned down a street she didn't know the name of, and kept walking. Senate testimony meant the thing was real in a different way than a DOT report. It meant someone with a gavel and a committee majority thought there was enough here to put on record under oath. It meant that the $5.2 billion contract wasn't just in review. It was under public-facing scrutiny, the kind that didn't quietly disappear into a filing cabinet. It also meant that Harlow Air was not going to let this happen without a fight, and that the fight, when it came, would be pointed at her, at her record, her history, her moment of freezing in the cold Colorado air, while an officer named Briggs wrote something with a maybe-not-moving pen at every decision she'd made or not made that could be held up as evidence that she was unreliable, exaggerating, or compromised. She thought about the letter of reprimand in her file. 2019. She'd refused to transfer a patient against a colonel's order because the patient had a BP of 68/40 and moving him would have killed him. She'd been right. The letter was still there. Those 2 facts existed side by side in her record, unchanged, and she'd made peace with that a long time ago. Or she'd thought she had. Now she was less sure. She turned another corner and stopped. Across the street, parked in front of a dry cleaner's, was a black SUV with federal plates. She wouldn't have noticed it, except that there was someone in the driver's seat who was actively not looking at her, which was the thing that made her look. She stood on the sidewalk and stared at it for a long 3 seconds. Then she took out her phone and took a photo of the plate. Then she turned around and walked back to Prue's apartment. She didn't know if it meant anything. It might have been completely unrelated. Federal employees existed in Washington the way weather existed, distributed and unremarkable. But she'd spent 6 years in environments where the things that looked incidental were sometimes the things that mattered, and she'd learned to document first and conclude later. She sent the plate photo to Obi with a message. Not sure if relevant. Parked outside my sister's block for at least 30 minutes. Federal plate. Wanted you to have it. His response came back in 4 minutes. Thank you. I'll check it. Don't alter your plans. She put the phone in her pocket and climbed the steps back to Prue's door. Inside, Biscuit greeted her with the enthusiasm of an animal who considered every departure and return a separate and complete event. She took off the peacoat. The apartment was warm. It smelled like the dinner Prue had started while she was out, something with garlic and something with pasta, ordinary and specific and real. Obi's second message came while she was hanging up the coat. Plate comes back to a vehicle pool registered to Harlow Air's contracted security and investigative firm. Name of firm is Alderton and Mace. They specialize in corporate threat assessment and litigation support. She read it twice. She set her phone on the counter. Harlow Air had sent investigators to watch her sister's block. Not to her, not to Obi, not to the Senate Commerce Committee, to the home of a woman who had a dog named Biscuit and Pasta on the stove, because her sister was a nurse from Colorado who'd written a 1,400-word incident report and emailed it to a federal investigator. She picked up the phone and dialed Kwan's number. It rang once. Ms. Voss? 9 a.m. was my timeline, Amelia said. I'm moving it up. I'll testify. Kwan's response was immediate. I'll notify the chair tonight. Be at the Dirksen building by 8:30 Monday morning. Bring everything. Amelia said she would. She hung up and stood in Prue's hallway with the peacoat still in her hand, and the garlic smell from the kitchen was stronger now, and she could hear Prue moving around in there, the soft percussion of a pan being set down, a drawer opening and closing. Ordinary sounds. She stood in them for a moment like they were something she needed to memorize. Then she went and told her sister what was happening, and Prue listened without saying anything until the end, and then she said, "Eat first," and put a bowl in front of her, and Amelia ate. The weekend moved fast in the way that weekends move when you're preparing for something you can't fully prepare for. Obi sent a briefing document Saturday morning, 14 pages, dense, formatted like the kind of thing that had been through 3 rounds of legal review. It outlined the committee's specific areas of inquiry, the evidentiary framework the DOT review had constructed, and a list of documents Amelia should bring: her incident report, her military separation papers, her Callaway Regional Employment Record, any written communication she'd had with Harlow Air or their representatives since the incident. She gathered everything into a folder. She also printed the Alderton and Mace plate photo, because nobody had told her to, but it felt like something that should exist in paper. Saturday afternoon, she called Marcus at Callaway Regional, not because she had to, but because Marcus had texted her 3 times with increasing concern, and she owed him a real answer. He picked up on the second ring and immediately said, "Okay, so I saw the article." And then she spent 20 minutes explaining the situation while he made the sounds of a person recalibrating his understanding of his coworker. At the end, he said, "Do you need anything from me?" And she said no. And he said, "I'm going to bring you a breakfast burrito when you get back regardless." And she said that was fine. Sunday, she didn't talk to anyone except Prue. They watched something on television that neither of them paid attention to, and Biscuit sat between them. And at some point, Prue fell asleep on her end of the couch, and Amelia sat in the dark and thought about nothing in particular, which was a skill she'd cultivated in the field. The ability to go quiet inside, to conserve the processing power, to not spend the night before a hard thing burning through everything you'd need for the actual hard thing. She slept 4 hours. That was enough. The Dirksen Senate office building on a Monday morning in November had the particular energy of an institution that takes itself seriously and expects you to also. Amelia arrived at 8:15 in her one good blazer, charcoal, bought for a job interview 18 months ago and worn exactly twice since, with her folder and her ID and the specific posture of someone who has entered rooms under worse circumstances and knows what steady looks like. Kwan met her in the lobby. She was shorter than her voice suggested, with close-cropped hair and the brisk efficiency of someone who had decided somewhere around age 30 that pleasantries were a negotiable commodity. She shook Amelia's hand and assessed her without appearing to assess her, and said, "The session begins at 9. I'll walk you through what to expect." What to expect? As Kwan described it in 12 minutes of corridor walking. 4 committee members present, closed session, a court reporter, no cameras, Amelia's testimony under oath with full Fifth Amendment protections she was unlikely to need. The chair was a senator from Vermont named Aldous Price, who Kwan described as thorough and occasionally impatient. Two of the other three members were aviation subcommittee regulars. The fourth was a newer member who would likely ask fewer questions but take more notes. Harlow Air's legal team had submitted a 17-page counterbrief that morning. Amelia would not be shown it before testifying, which was standard, but Kwan had read it and told her the core argument. The airline staff had followed established protocol. The complaint had been filed in good faith, and the decision to remove Amelia had been a legitimate exercise of the air. The protocol is the defense, Amelia said. Yes. And the question is whether the protocol itself is the problem. Kwan looked at her. You understand it quickly. I've read about 17 pages of their policy documentation in the last 4 days. The protocol gives the airline almost complete discretion. There's no requirement that a complaint be specific. There's no checkpoint where someone asks whether the complaint is credible. The officer who removes a passenger is empowered to act on a colleague's word that a complaint was received without seeing the complaint themselves. She paused. The protocol is designed to insulate the airline from having to make a defensible decision in the moment. It outsources the judgment to the complainant. That's exactly what you should say in there, Kwan said, and pushed open the door. Oh. The room was smaller than she'd expected. Congressional hearing rooms on television were wide and cathedral-ceilinged and lined with flags. This one was a conference room with a long table, decent lighting, and the smell of recycled air and old carpet. The 4 senators sat on one side. A court reporter was already set up at a small desk in the corner. There was a pitcher of water and a glass in front of the seat where Amelia would sit. She was sworn in. She stated her name, her occupation, her prior service. Senator Price, gray-haired reading glasses pushed up onto his forehead, with the face of a man who had sat through enough testimony to have strong opinions about how it should be delivered, looked at her over the top of his glasses and said, "Ms. Voss, in your own words and in your own time, tell us what happened." She told it. The same way she'd told it in the incident report, in the same sequence, with the same calibration between fact and observation. What she had directly experienced, and what she had inferred and what she had subsequently learned, and from whom. It took 23 minutes. She didn't need the notes in her folder. She remembered all of it exactly, the way she remembered everything that happened in a room when something was wrong. When she finished, Price said, "You mentioned that the security officer never showed you the complaint, never read you any specific language from it. Correct? Did you ask to see it?" "I asked multiple times for the specific language of what I was accused of. I was told we'd discuss it in the security office. When we were in the security office, I was told the complaint described discomfort. No action was specified. And at that point, you were already off the aircraft." "I was already off the aircraft and the boarding door was closed." One of the other senators, a woman in her 60s named Maricel Doan, who had the attentive stillness of someone who'd been a prosecutor before she was a legislator, leaned forward slightly. "Ms. Voss, you have a background in mass casualty triage." "Yes, ma'am." "In that context, you were trained to make rapid decisions about priority and response based on available information." "Yes." "In your assessment, and this is your professional assessment, not a personal grievance, was the decision to remove you from that flight consistent with a trained, rational response to a genuine safety concern?" Amelia thought about how to answer that in a way that was honest and not inflammatory, and not falsely modest about what she knew. "No," she said. "A genuine safety response to a credible threat requires specificity. You don't treat a chest wound because someone in the hallway says they feel worried. You assess. You look for indicators. You gather information before you act, or you act on the most immediate threat and simultaneously gather more information. What happened at Harlow International was the opposite. The action was taken first, without specificity, and no information was gathered afterward that could have justified it. The justification never arrived because no one went looking for it." Doan wrote something down. The 4th senator, a younger man who'd been largely quiet, looked up from his notepad. "Ms. Voss," he said, "do you know who Petra Galt is?" The room shifted slightly, not physically, but in attention. Price's reading glasses came down off his forehead. "I know who she is," Amelia said. "How?" "I found her name through publicly available information. She appears in a news article about a charity event. She's identified as the wife of Warren Galt, who sits on the Harlow Air Board. You looked that up yourself?" "Yes, the day of the incident." "Why?" She paused for exactly the right length of time, long enough to be thoughtful, not long enough to seem uncertain. Because when something unusual happens in a clinical environment, you try to understand the context. Why this patient? Why this symptom? Why now? It's the same instinct. Who made a complaint against me on a flight from Denver to Washington, and is there any context for why? And the context you found was that the complainant is connected to the airline's board. That's what the public record shows. I haven't alleged a conspiracy. I documented what I found. Price cleared his throat. The committee has independently verified the relationship between the complainant and the board member. He looked at her steadily. Ms. Voss, the counterbrief submitted by Harlow Air this morning states that you were agitated and unpredictable in your behavior aboard the aircraft, and that the complaint was made in good faith based on observable conduct. She felt the temperature of the room change, the way you feel a weather system coming before it arrives. I was seated with my eyes closed, she said. I was not agitated. I was not loud. I did not interact with anyone prior to the flight attendant approaching me. If observable conduct means existing in a first-class seat while appearing to be military, then I'm not sure what to do with that. You appeared to be military. I was wearing cargo pants and a plain gray t-shirt. I carry myself a certain way. People who've spent time around military personnel sometimes read that. A pause. I don't know what Ms. Galt saw. I know what I did. The session went another 40 minutes. By the end, Amelia's water glass was empty and her back ached from the chair, and she had answered 31 questions, some of them useful, and some of them the kind of question that gets asked because a senator needs to appear thorough. She signed the court reporter's transcript request form. She shook 4 hands. She walked out into the corridor with Quan beside her and didn't speak until they turned the first corner. You did well, Quan said. I told the truth. That's what doing well looks like in there. Quan checked her phone, something brief, then put it away. The chair is requesting a follow-up document from the DOT review team by Wednesday. The contract approval meeting is now officially under a hold notice. Nothing moves until the committee receives the full review file. She paused. Harlow Air's legal team is going to escalate. They filed a motion this morning to exclude your testimony on the basis that you have a personal interest in the outcome. I do have a personal interest in the outcome. Yes, that's not actually disqualifying, but they're going to argue it is. Quan stopped walking. She turned and looked at Amelia directly, which felt different from the professional assessments she'd been making all morning. More specific, less managed. There's something I didn't mention before the session because I didn't want it affecting how you testified. The February incident, the one Obi mentioned, the male passenger who was removed, his name is Darius Fell. He's an emergency medicine physician. He filed a complaint with the airline that was never formally acknowledged. He's been trying to get someone to listen for 9 months. She paused. He'd like to speak with you, if you're willing. Amelia looked at her. You're building a pattern. The pattern already exists. I'm making it visible. Ok. She met Darius Fell that afternoon in a coffee shop 6 blocks from the Dirksen building. He was 51, broad-shouldered, with the kind of tired that lives in a person's eyes when they've been fighting something for longer than they expected. He ordered black coffee and didn't touch it. They told me my behavior was aggressive, he said. I was reading a journal article. I had headphones in. The person behind me told a flight attendant I'd been staring at her. He looked at his coffee. I'm a black man traveling in a suit, reading a medical journal, and someone decided to feel threatened by that. Were there other passengers of color in the cabin? Several. Only one of us got removed. He wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. I filed a complaint with the airline, with the DOT, with the FAA. I got 3 form responses and 1 phone call from a customer relations manager who offered me a travel credit. A pause. When Quan's office called me, I thought it was another dead end. It took me a week to believe it wasn't. What changed your mind? He looked at her. You. What you did with your incident report. The detail in it. The fact that you documented everything immediately, with timestamps. He shook his head slightly. I waited 3 weeks to file mine. I kept thinking someone would just acknowledge it was wrong, and I wouldn't need to make it into a thing. He paused. By the time I filed, half the detail I had in my head had softened. Not because I was lying, because memory does that when you let it sit. She thought about the 9 months he'd been carrying this. 9 months of form responses and dead ends, and customer relations managers with travel credits. She thought about her 45 seconds of not knowing whether to push back on Briggs in the security office, about how close she'd come to just accepting the 615 in the voucher and going home quieter than she'd arrived. "The committee is going to want your testimony too," she said. "Quan told me." He finally picked up his coffee. "I already said yes." They talked for another 40 minutes, not about the case, but about emergency medicine and trauma nursing, the specific overlap of their fields, the places where the protocols matched, and the places where clinical instinct had to fill in what protocols left out. He'd done 2 years in a level 1 trauma center in a city she knew. She'd evaked patients through a corridor he'd probably never see. They were two strangers who had been trained by separate systems to do the same fundamental thing, keep people alive under pressure, and who had ended up sitting across from each other in a Washington coffee shop because an airline's complaint protocol had no floor on what constituted a threat. When she got back to Prue's apartment, there were 2 missed calls from a number she didn't recognize with a Drennan area code. Not her hospital's number. A cell phone. She called it back. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. No recorded greeting, just a beep. She didn't leave a message. She looked up the number instead, which took longer than finding Petra Galt's name because cell phone attribution is less public than charity gala guest lists. She found it after 20 minutes, in a professional directory that was a 1.5 years out of date. The number was listed as a secondary contact for a man named Gordon Priel, who was identified in the directory as Senior Vice President of Operations at Harlow Air's Mountain West Division. Harlow Air's Mountain West Division, which was headquartered in Drennan, Colorado, the same city as Callaway Regional Medical Center. She put the phone down. She looked at the P-code on its hook by the door. She thought about Alderton and Mace's SUV parked outside on Saturday, and now a call from a Harlow Air SVP's personal number the day after her Senate testimony. The shape of it was not subtle. She called Obi. "They're making contact," she said when he picked up. "Tell me." She told him about the calls. He was quiet for a long moment. "Don't call back. Don't engage. Send me the number and I'll run it through our office." A pause. "Amelia, listen to me carefully. If anyone from Harlow Air or any firm associated with them attempts to contact you directly, and I mean anyone, in any format, you forward it to me before you respond, not after. Before." What are they trying to do? Best case? They're trying to open a back-channel negotiation before the review files. Gauge whether you have a number, a settlement threshold, something that makes this go away quietly. His voice was level, but she could hear something beneath it. Worst case, they're trying to establish that you initiated contact with a party in the litigation which they could use to complicate your testimony's independence. They'd manufacture a contact. They'd characterize an existing one. There's a difference in terms of what's legal, but not much difference in terms of what it does to a case. She sat with that for a moment. The shape of it now was clear. Harlow Air wasn't going to fight the facts of what happened because the facts were documented and time-stamped and under oath. They were going to fight the person who had documented them. They were going to try to make her the story instead of the story the story. She'd been in enough military environments to recognize a flanking move when she saw one. The question was where the main front was and whether she was still standing on it. "Obi," she said. "The review file. When does it go to the committee?" "Wednesday, as ordered." "And the contract approval hold, how firm is it?" "It's a committee hold, not a court order. It's firm enough that the carrier can't proceed, but if the committee doesn't act within the timeline, the contracting authority can move forward anyway." A pause. "We have a 7-day window from the hold notice. That's it." 7 days. The math was simple and unpleasant. The committee hold had been filed today. The full review file would arrive Wednesday. The committee would need time to review it and decide whether to act, which meant the actual decision window was somewhere between Thursday and the following Monday, and Harlow Air knew this as well as Obi did, and their legal team had probably already calendared it. "What happens if someone gets to one of the committee members?" Amelia asked. "Between now and then." "There are rules about that." "I know there are rules." A longer pause. "Then you know the rules don't always hold." He exhaled. "We're watching it. We have people watching it. That's the honest answer." She said okay. She said she'd send him the number. She ended the call. Prue came in from the bedroom looking at her. "You have that face. What face? The face where something is happening and you've already decided what you're going to do about it, but you haven't decided whether to tell me. Amelia looked at her sister. They're not just fighting the review, they're trying to manage me. Can they? They're going to try. She picked up the peacoat, then set it back down. I need to make another call to Dr. Voss. Your supervisor? Why? Because if Gordon Priel's next call isn't to me, it's to someone at the hospital, and I want Renata to hear it from me before she hears it from him. She dialed. It rang twice. Voss picked up with the clipped efficiency of someone mid-shift. Voss, what's happened? I testified before the Senate Commerce Committee this morning. The airline's legal team filed a motion to exclude me, and I think someone from the airline's regional office is about to contact the hospital. A short silence. Contact us how? I don't know yet, but their Mountain West SVP called my personal cell this afternoon. Drennan area code. I didn't answer. Another silence, this one more deliberate. When Voss spoke again, her voice had shifted into something harder and more administrative. I'm going to loop in our legal office and our board chair tonight. If anyone from Harlow Air contacts this hospital, we'll document it and refer it to you and to the federal review team. A pause. Amelia, are you safe? The question caught her sideways. Not because it was alarming, she didn't feel unsafe, not physically, but because nobody had asked her that exactly, in those words, in a long time. The Army had drilled a version of that question into operational culture, but it had always been about physical threats, about the environment, about whether the perimeter was held. This was different. This was a person asking whether she was okay. I'm okay, she said. I'm handling it. That's not what I asked. She paused. I'm managing, she said, which was more accurate. One thing at a time. All right. Voss's voice went back to its administrative register. Don't do anything without running it through OB first. And when you're back on shift, we'll talk in person. She hung up. She looked at Prue. Prue was leaning against the kitchen doorframe with her arms crossed, which was a posture that meant she was listening and also thinking about whether to say the thing she was thinking. Say it, Amelia said. You're not scared, Prue said. I'm not scared. That's different from being scared. I know. Amelia sat down on the couch. Biscuit immediately arrived and put his chin on her knee, the good one, exactly the same as the first night. She put her hand on his head. I'm scared about the things I can't see. The committee member they might get to. The person at the hospital who might say the wrong thing to a reporter. The letter of reprimand in my file that's going to get circulated somewhere. She scratched behind Biscuit's ear. I'm not scared of Gordon Priel calling me. I know what that is. Prue was quiet for a moment. Then, what do you need? Amelia thought about it, actually thought about it, not the deflection she usually gave to that question. I need the review file to land on that committee table without anything happening to it between now and Wednesday. She looked at her phone. Obi's last message was still on the screen. We have people watching it. She hoped that was true. She was about to put the phone down when it vibrated with a new message. Not from Obi, not from Quan, from a number she'd never seen, a different Washington area code, no name in her contacts, and the message was 4 words long. They got to Doan. She stared at the 4 words for 3 seconds, then called the number back. It rang once. A woman's voice, low and fast. Don't say my name. I work in the committee clerk's office. Senator Doan received a call this afternoon from a partner at Alderton and Mace. The call lasted 19 minutes. 2 hours later, her office contacted the chair's staff to request a postponement of the Wednesday filing deadline. Amelia stood up. Biscuit stepped back, reading the shift in her. How do you know this? Because I logged the communications calendar for 3 of the 4 members in that session. The postponement request came through me. A pause, short and tight. I'm not supposed to be making this call. I'm making it because I was in that room this morning and I watched you testify, and I've been watching this committee defer to money for 8 years, and I'm tired of it. What's the postponement request based on? Procedural irregularity. They're arguing your testimony should be re-examined before the review file is accepted. That the committee accepted testimony from a witness with a financial stake in the outcome without proper vetting. Another pause. If Doan co-signs the request, Price has to consider it. He doesn't have to grant it, but he has to consider it formally, which takes time, and time is exactly what they need. How long does the consideration take? 3 days minimum, maybe 5. The math landed immediately. 3 days minimum pushed them past the contract hold's 7-day window. The hold would expire. The contracting authority would be free to proceed. The review file would arrive to a committee that was still in procedural dispute and couldn't act on it in time. Does Price know about the Alderton and Mace call? Not yet. Who does? You, me, whoever made the call from Alderton's side. A breath. And now the clerk who logs communications, who is going to be very easy to identify if this conversation becomes known. Amelia understood what that meant. This woman had handed her something and was telling her simultaneously that using it carelessly would destroy her. I hear you, she said. I'll protect the source. I don't need protection. I need someone to do something with it before tomorrow morning. The line went dead. Amelia stood in Prue's living room for 4 seconds. Then she called Obi. He picked up on the first ring, which meant he was still at his desk, which meant he was already tracking something. I know, he said, before she finished her first sentence. You know about Doan. We know about the postponement request. We don't have the Alderton connection yet. That's new. Send me exactly what you were told, verbatim, in a text. No names, no identifiers for your source. Obi, they're gonna run out the clock. I know. If the hold expires, I know, Amelia. His voice was still controlled, but there was something underneath it now, a compressed urgency that hadn't been there before. Listen to me. We have a parallel track. The DOT Inspector General has independent authority to place a procurement hold that is not subject to the committee's timeline. It's a different instrument. It requires a higher threshold of documented evidence. But if we can establish that a party to the contract actively attempted to obstruct a congressional review, that threshold is met. He paused. I've been building toward that threshold for 3 days. The Alderton-Doan call may be what closes it. She processed that. You were expecting something like this. I was expecting them to do something. I didn't know what. A short pause. They're not subtle people. They're people who have money and attorneys, and the assumption that those two things solve problems. And usually they do. Usually the person on the other side runs out of patience or resources or both. He paused again. Text me what your source told you. Word for word. I need it in the next 10 minutes. She texted it. Then she sat back down on the couch, and Biscuit returned to her knee, and Prue came out of the kitchen and looked at her face and said, How bad? Bad, manageable, maybe. That's not a scale I find reassuring. It's the honest one. Prue sat in the armchair across from her. The television was still on from earlier, muted, showing some cable news segment with a chyron that Amelia couldn't read from this angle. The apartment was warm. Outside it was fully dark now, past 8 o'clock, and Washington in November after dark had the particular weight of a city that never fully sleeps but does slow down, just enough that the silence feels like something. Tell me about the army, Prue said. Amelia looked at her. What? When things were bad. Tell me about a time when things were bad and they got better anyway. She thought about that for a moment. About what to say, and whether any of it would actually help, or whether Prue was asking for her own reasons, and this was the particular form of comfort her sister offered. Not reassurance, not solutions, just the request to remember out loud. There was a night in the Kale Valley, she said. Our FOB took incoming and we lost power to the surgical unit for 11 minutes. Generator failure. We had a patient open on the table, abdominal, 3 bleeders. We were 20 minutes from closing. 11 minutes of flashlights and manual pressure and 2 nurses talking a surgeon through what he already knew but couldn't see. She paused. We closed him. He made it to the medevac. He survived. Another pause. It wasn't because of anything heroic. It was because everyone in that room had already thought about what they'd do if power went out. We'd never talked about it out loud, but we'd all thought about it. And when it happened, we just did the version of the plan that lived in our heads. Prue was quiet for a moment. Do you have a version of the plan for this? Amelia looked at her phone. No new messages from Obi yet. I have parts of one. Then you'll fill in the rest when you need to, Prue said. Same as before. It wasn't transformative. It didn't resolve anything, but it was accurate, and accuracy was what she needed right now, not comfort, and Prue had always known the difference between those two things. She slept 5 hours. It was enough. Obi called at 6:50 Tuesday morning. He'd been awake since 4. The IG's office filed an independent procurement hold at 5:45 a.m., he said. It supersedes the committee timeline. The contract cannot move forward under any circumstances until the hold is resolved, regardless of whether the committee's original hold expires. She let out a breath she'd been holding since last night. What's the threshold they cited? Active interference with a federal oversight proceeding. Specifically, documented third-party contact with a committee member during a live review period by a firm engaged by the subject of the review. A pause. The Alderton Doan call was the piece we needed. The IG's office had the other 2 data points already. Your text last night connected them. How did the IG get the call documentation so fast? Alderton and Mace bills for its time. 19-minute consultation calls to Senate committee members show up on itemized billing records. We had a subpoena for Alderton's billing records filed before midnight. He paused. It was not a comfortable night for anyone on the federal side either. I want to be clear. She was standing at Prue's kitchen window with coffee. She'd actually made herself this time. Real coffee, not airport coffee. Looking at the backyard, the dormant grass, the bird feeder that still needed refilling. What happens now? Now the committee has breathing room. Price can table the postponement request because it's moot. The IG hold protects the timeline regardless. And he's going to. I spoke to Quan at 6 a.m. Price is furious about the Doan contact. He doesn't like his committee being worked. And Harlow Air's legal team? They know about the IG hold. They received formal notice at 6 a.m. A long pause. Their lead counsel requested an emergency meeting with our office this morning. They want but to discuss terms. The words sat in the air between them. Terms. The language of people who have run the numbers and found them unfavorable. What kind of terms? I don't know yet. I don't meet with them until 2 p.m. But I want you to know it's happening, and I want to be clear about something. Whatever they offer, it goes through you. You are the named individual in the primary incident. The DOT review is the mechanism, but you're the reason the mechanism has teeth right now. Nothing gets resolved without your input. He paused. Are you clear on that? Yes. Good. A pause. There's one more thing. The Nashville nurse, Dr. Fell's February incident, and the Nashville incident from last week. Both of those individuals have now formally joined the review as additional complainants. The pattern is documented across 3 incidents, 3 witnesses, 3 separate removal events. That changes the liability calculus for Harlow Air significantly. She thought about the pediatric nurse practitioner in Nashville standing in a gate area, about Darius Fell's 9 months of form responses, about the particular exhaustion of being a medical professional who spends their entire working life making critical decisions under pressure, and then being treated like a disruption by someone who felt a feeling on a Tuesday afternoon. Tell me about the 2 p.m. meeting, she said. She didn't attend the 2 p.m. meeting. That was Obi's room, not hers. She wasn't a party to the formal DOT proceedings in a legal capacity, only as a witness, and walking into a negotiation between federal investigators and corporate counsel would have created complications she didn't need. Instead, she sat in a coffee shop 4 blocks from the DOT building with a legal pad and wrote everything she wanted to say if she ever had the chance to say it directly to the people who'd put her in that fluorescent room. Not because she was going to read it to anyone, she wasn't, but because writing it out was the thing that kept her from letting it live inside her unchecked, and unchecked things had a way of surfacing at the wrong moment. She wrote for 90 minutes. Then she folded the pages, put them in her folder with everything else, and ordered another coffee. At 4:17, Obi called. They came with a settlement package, he said. Personal compensation to the 3 named individuals, formal policy revision, independent third-party audit of the complaint protocol. No admission of liability in the documentation. No admission of liability. Standard corporate settlement structure. It protects them from the language being used in civil litigation down the road. She thought about that. About what it meant to take a document that didn't say we were wrong and call it resolution. What did you tell them? I told them I'd convey the terms. That's all I'm authorized to do. A pause. Amelia, I want your honest read, not the one you think I need. Is there a version of a settlement that satisfies what you came here to do? She thought about it for a real moment, not a quick one. If the policy changes are real, independently audited, with enforcement mechanisms, not just language in a press release, and if the contract approval is conditioned on demonstrated compliance rather than promised compliance, then yes. The point was never to destroy the airline. The point was to stop the protocol from being used on the next nurse, or the next doctor, or the next veteran who closes his eyes on a plane. She paused. But if it's a check and a document that says nothing, then no. That's what I expected you to say. He sounded like he meant it as a compliment, in the dry way that was apparently his version of warmth. I'm going to push back on the liability language. I'm also going to push for the compliance condition on the contract. That's not a standard term. They'll resist it. But we have the IG hold, and we have 3 documented incidents, and we have a Senate committee chair who is, at this moment, actively considering whether to open a public session. That's a lot of leverage. Use it. I intend to. He hung up. What happened over the next 36 hours was not cinematic. It was phone calls and revised documents and counterproposals, and a Wednesday morning session with Kwan that lasted 3 hours and covered language Amelia had never encountered before. Procurement compliance frameworks, independent monitor appointment procedures, the specific difference between a policy revision and a policy audit, and she absorbed all of it with the same methodical attention she brought to a new clinical protocol because the mechanism mattered as much as the outcome, and she wasn't going to sign off on something she didn't understand. Darius Fell called her Wednesday evening. He'd been in contact with Obi's office and knew the broad shape of where things stood. The liability language, he said without preamble. I know. I spent 9 months being told there was nothing to document, nothing official, no admission of anything. I need something in the record that says what happened was wrong. I know, she said again. Obi's pushing for it. I don't know if we get it. If we don't, he stopped. I can't take a check and a policy update and call it done. Not after 9 months. Then we tell Obi that, both of us. Together. She paused. Can you be in Washington tomorrow? A brief silence. I can make that work. They met Obi in his office Thursday morning. A government office with government furniture and a whiteboard that still had something from a previous meeting on it that nobody had erased. Fell sat across from Obi. Amelia sat beside Fell. The Nashville nurse, whose name was Constance Bird, joined by phone from Nashville because she had a shift she couldn't trade, and a supervisor who was already watching the situation closely. Obi laid out where the negotiations stood. Harlow Air's legal team had agreed in principle to the independent audit and the compliance condition on the contract. They were still resisting the liability language. Their current proposed text acknowledged quote-unquote operational failures without specifying that those failures had resulted in discriminatory treatment of passengers. Constance Bird's voice came through the phone speaker, flat and clear. Operational failures. That's what they're calling it. That's their current language, yes. I was standing in a gate area being told I made someone uncomfortable. That's not an operational failure. That's a person making a decision about what I looked like. I agree with you, Obi said. Then what's the path? Obi put his pen down. The path is that we don't accept that language, and we make clear we don't accept it, and if they won't move, we tell Senator Price's office that settlement talks have stalled, and the committee should proceed with the full public session. He looked at each of them in turn, at Fell, at Amelia, at the phone on the table. Public session means testimony on record in open chamber. It means cameras. It means the executives and the complaint protocol and Warren Galt and Alderton and Mace are all in a public record that anyone can access and report on. He paused. That's what they're most afraid of. The settlement was their attempt to get ahead of that. If they know we'll walk away from it, the language changes. Amelia looked at Fell. Fell looked at her. Walk away, Fell said. Walk away, Amelia confirmed. From the phone. Walk away. Obi picked his pen back up. All right, he said. The call came Friday at 11 a.m. Harlow Air's lead counsel had revised the liability language. The new text acknowledged that passengers had been removed from Harlow Air flights based on subjective complaints that did not meet a reasonable standard for documented safety concern, and that this removal process had caused harm to the affected individuals. It did not use the word discrimination. It did not name any specific executive. But it said, in plain language that would survive being read by a reporter or a judge, that the airline had done something wrong to specific people and that those people had been harmed by it. It wasn't everything. It was something real. She read the revised language 3 times, standing in the DOT building's corridor while Obi watched her. She thought about what Darius Fell had said. I can't call it done if there's nothing in the record that says it was wrong. This put something in the record. Is this enforceable? She asked. As a settlement document, yes. The compliance monitor will report to our office quarterly for 2 years. If the policy revisions aren't implemented or the audit finds ongoing violations, the contract hold is automatically reinstated and the document becomes an exhibit. He paused. It has teeth. She handed it back. Then we're close. What she didn't know, standing in that corridor, was that while Harlow Air's legal team was finalizing settlement language with the DOT, a different conversation was happening 4 floors above her in a conference room she'd never seen. A conversation between Senator Price's chief of staff and 2 members of Harlow Air's board, not Warren Galt, who had quietly and suddenly announced he was stepping back from his board role citing personal reasons, a development that had been publicly attributed to nothing and privately attributed to the Alderton and Mace billing subpoena, revealing conversations that nobody on the board wanted associated with their name. The 2 remaining board members in that conference room were there because Price had summoned them, not because they'd requested a meeting, and the distinction was significant. She learned about the meeting from Quan, who called at 2 p.m. Price brought them in himself. He's making it clear that the committee's oversight interest doesn't end with the settlement. He wants structural board-level accountability. Specifically, he wants documentation of how the complaint protocol was approved at the governance level and who signed off on it. A pause. Warren Galt's name is in that documentation. Galt's already stepping back. Stepping back isn't the same as accountability. Quan's voice was dry. Price is making that distinction to them very directly right now. Amelia leaned against the corridor wall. What does that mean in practice? It means the board is being asked formally to produce the governance record. Who approved the protocol? Who reviewed it? Who was present at the meetings where it was ratified? If Galt's name is on those documents, and we believe it is, then his personal distancing from the board doesn't remove him from the accountability record. A pause. The committee may refer the governance findings to the DOJ. That's a separate track from what your office is resolving with the settlement. The DOJ. That was a different order of magnitude. Not a policy revision and a compliance monitor. That was potential criminal exposure for the people who designed a system specifically to generate cover for discriminatory removals. Does Petra Galt know her husband is in the governance records? Amelia asked. If she doesn't, she will soon. Quan paused. Ms. Voss, I want to be clear about something. The trajectory of this investigation has moved significantly beyond the scope of what your original incident alone would have produced. The Fell incident, the Bird incident, the Alderton contact with Doan, the governance documentation. These are layers that built over time and across people. You didn't do this alone. I know. But you started it, in the specific sense that you documented it immediately, completely, and in a format that a federal investigator could use. If your incident report had been vague, or delayed, or framed as a personal grievance rather than a factual account, none of the rest of this has the same foundation. She paused. I don't say that to make you feel responsible for the outcome. I say it because it's true, and because the people who drafted that complaint protocol were counting on the fact that most people, when they're humiliated in a fluorescent room after missing a flight, don't write a 1,400-word incident report and email it to a federal investigator before the day is out. Amelia looked down the corridor. At the far end, a cleaning cart was moving slowly past a row of office doors. Ordinary government building business, going on the same way it had been going on while all of this happened around it. I was trained to document, she said. Yes, and they were counting on you not being that kind of person. A pause. They miscalculated. The settlement was signed Friday afternoon. 3 named individuals, documented harm, real policy revision, independent compliance monitor, contract eligibility conditioned on quarterly audit clearance. Harlow Air's CEO issued a statement, not a press release, a signed letter, that was included as an appendix to the settlement and would become part of the public record when the committee filed its review findings. The letter used the word wrong. It used it twice. Gordon Priel, the Mountain West SVP whose personal cell had called her Tuesday, resigned from the airline by close of business Friday. No public statement, just a LinkedIn update that changed his employment status to blank. She noticed it because Prue was checking for it, had apparently set a news alert on the man's name 3 days ago without telling Amelia, which was the most Prue thing she could imagine. Warren Galt's formal removal from the board was announced Saturday morning, attributed publicly to the committee's governance inquiry. The announcement was careful in its language, but the governance record had already been submitted, and the people who read this particular kind of corporate announcement for a living were already writing the pieces that would explain what it meant. Amelia was on Prue's couch when the notification about Galt came through. Biscuit was next to her, fully asleep, taking up 3/4 of the space with the specific entitlement of a dog who has decided a couch is his and is allowing a human to share it. She read the announcement twice, put the phone face down on the cushion, and looked at the ceiling for a while. She didn't feel the thing she'd expected to feel. She thought there would be something clean about it, some moment of clear satisfaction, the sense of a circuit completing. What she felt instead was more complicated and less satisfying and probably more honest, tired, mostly. Relieved that the structure of it had held, aware of all the places where it could have gone differently and hadn't. Thinking about Constance Bird in Nashville, who had a shift today and was probably doing a patient intake right now, and whether the airline's letter and Galt's resignation would feel like anything real from where she was standing. Her flight back to Drennan was Sunday morning. She packed Saturday night, which took 11 minutes because she'd never fully unpacked, and helped Prue make dinner, and they sat across from each other at the small table with the good coffee and the food and the dog looking hopefully at both of them. And Prue said, "Are you going to be okay when you get back?" "I don't know what okay looks like yet." "That's usually a sign you'll be fine eventually." "Your logic there is unclear." "It's worked so far." She got up early Sunday. The taxi to the airport came at 5:40. Prue hugged her at the door in the specific way that Prue hugged, arms completely around, not the performative version, the actual one. And Biscuit sat at the top of the steps and watched her go with the expression of a dog who doesn't understand departures, but has come to accept them as a feature of the world. She got to the airport. She checked in. She walked to the gate, a different terminal, not Harlow Air, and sat down in the boarding area with the coffee she'd bought and her carry-on at her feet. Around her, the ordinary business of an airport at 6 in the morning, the tired families, the business people already on their phones, the gate agent doing the pre-boarding checklist, a child asleep on a row of chairs with a jacket pulled over her like a blanket. She looked at her boarding pass. 14B, middle seat, coach. Her knee would ache by the time she landed, and that was fine. Her phone buzzed. OB. Committee filed the full review findings this morning. Public record as of 0700. DOJ has the governance referral. Wanted you to know before you saw it elsewhere. She put the phone back in her pocket. She thought about the incident report she'd written in this same building. A different terminal, but the same building, 10 days ago. 1,600 words that had become the frame around which everything else had been built. She thought about how she'd almost not written it, how she'd sat in the charging station with cold coffee and a bad knee, and 19 hours of tired and almost just waited for the 6:15 and gone home quieter than she'd arrived. The gate agent picked up the microphone. "Good morning. We'll begin boarding shortly. At this time, we'd like to invite any passengers who require additional assistance or extra time." Amelia stood up. She picked up her bag. She got in line. She was almost to the jetway door when someone called her name. She turned. The gate agent, young, early 20s, with the slightly overwhelmed look of someone on the early shift, was holding out a folded piece of paper. "Someone left this at the desk for you, said to give it to the woman in 14B. Amelia took it, unfolded it. One line, handwritten, no signature. "They pulled our security footage from February 4th. There's something on it you haven't seen. Call me before you land." A number. Washington area code. Not OB's, not Kwan's, not the clerk from the committee office. She looked up. The gate agent had already turned back to his screen. The jetway stretched ahead of her, the curved tube of it, the sound of the aircraft beyond. Behind her, the boarding line was moving. She folded the note. She put it in her jacket pocket, against the folded pages from the legal pad where she'd written everything she'd never said out loud. She walked down the jetway. She found her seat. She sat down, and the window was to her left, and the engine noise built slowly beneath her, and somewhere behind her, under cargo and luggage, and the ordinary weight of a plane full of people going somewhere, the footage from February 4th existed. And whatever was on it, nobody had told her about it, and the question of why not was already forming in the place in her mind where she kept the things that mattered. The plane began to move. The plane reached cruising altitude somewhere over Western Virginia, and Amelia unfolded the note again. She'd read it 4 times already. Once in the jetway, once in her seat before the doors closed, once during taxi, and now. And each time she read it, the same question surfaced in a different form. Why would someone have access to the February 4th security footage? And why would that footage contain something she hadn't been told about? And why would the person who knew about it wait until she was boarding a plane to tell her? The timing was either careless or deliberate, and in her experience, things that looked careless rarely were. She didn't call the number. She couldn't, at 37,000 feet with no in-flight Wi-Fi purchased, which was either a problem or a relief depending on how she chose to look at it. Instead, she did what she always did when she had a problem and no immediate action available. She thought through it systematically, the way she'd been trained to triage. What do I know? What do I not know? What are the possible explanations in order of likelihood? What she knew, the note had been left at the gate desk by someone who knew her name and her seat number. Seat assignments weren't public. Whoever left it had either followed her to the gate and watched her check in, or had access to the airline's passenger manifest, or had gotten the information from someone who did. The Washington area code on the number meant the person was likely still in the city, or wanted her to think they were. The reference to February 4th was specific. That was the date of Darius Fell's incident, 9 months before Amelia's own. She hadn't known the exact date until Obi mentioned it in their first briefing. It wasn't in any public reporting she'd seen, which meant whoever wrote the note had access to case information. That narrowed the pool considerably. Federal review staff, committee staff, Harlow Air's legal team, or someone connected to Alderton and Mace. The last 2 categories were people who would want her to call an unknown number for reasons she wouldn't like. The first 2 were people who could have called her through Obi or Quan if they'd wanted to reach her through legitimate channels. So either this was someone inside the legitimate structure who couldn't use the legitimate channels, a source protecting themselves, the way the clerk from the committee office had protected herself, or it was someone who wanted her to think that. She folded the note back into her pocket. She looked out the window. The cloud cover below was solid and white and gave the impression of a floor that wasn't there. She'd flown over enough of these to know what was under them, terrain, ordinary and specific, going about its business regardless of what was happening at 37,000 feet. And she found that thought steadying in the way that true things sometimes are. She landed in Drennan at 9:48. She had 2 bars of signal before she'd cleared the jetway. She called the number. It rang 3 times. Then a man's voice. Not a voice she recognized, older, with the flat, careful diction of someone who chose words the way a person chooses footing on unstable ground. Miss Voss? Thank you for calling. Who is this? My name is Arthur Sen. I was employed by Alderton and Mace until last Thursday. I resigned. A pause. I was the investigator assigned to your case. She stopped walking. A man behind her with a roller bag said, "Excuse me," and went around her. She stepped to the side of the concourse. You were surveilling me. I was conducting what the firm characterized as a threat assessment and litigation support engagement on behalf of Harlow Air. His voice was precise and without apology in it, but also without the smoothness of someone who'd rehearsed this. I was the person in the SUV outside your sister's building. I see. I was also the person who pulled the February 4th footage. That's what I need to tell you about. A breath. Ms. Voss. When Alderton took the engagement, I was given a brief that described you as a potential litigation liability. My job was to document your behavior, your contacts, anything that could be used to complicate your credibility. Standard engagement. I've done 30 like it. He paused. I was also asked to review the airport security footage from the February incident for anything that could be used to undermine Dr. Fell's account of what happened. And? The footage doesn't undermine him. It documents the complaint being fabricated. She was very still. Around her, the Drennan airport moved in its ordinary way. The baggage carousel, a family reuniting near the exit, the smell of the rental car desk and old carpet. Explain that. The terminal footage from February 4th shows Dr. Fell seated, reading, headphones in. It shows the complainant, a woman in seat 18C, looking at her phone for approximately 6 minutes, then standing, walking to the front of the cabin, and speaking with the flight attendant. The footage from the gate area, from before boarding, shows the same woman having a conversation with a Harlow Airgate supervisor that lasted 4 minutes and 20 seconds. We have audio. A pause. She knew him. They spoke by first name, and what she said to him, we have it on the gate microphone, included the words, "We need one more before the month closes." Amelia's jaw tightened. One more what? That's what I'm telling you. The complaint wasn't spontaneous, it was coordinated. His voice stayed level, but there was something underneath it now, the particular strain of a person saying out loud the thing they've been deciding whether to say for days. I don't know the full structure, but what I know is this. The gate supervisor who took the pre-board conversation was on the same Harlow Air regional payroll as Gordon Priel's Mountain West division. The woman who filed the February complaint has no public connection to the airline that I could find. But the footage exists and the audio exists, and Alderton has both of them, and when I flagged it to my supervising partner, because I thought it was material that the firm needed to manage carefully, he told me to file it under non-responsive and move on. Non-responsive, she said, meaning it wouldn't be produced to the Federal Review, meaning they intended to bury it. She thought about Darius Fell in the coffee shop, both hands wrapped around a cup of coffee he never drank. 9 months. 3 weeks before he filed his complaint because he kept thinking someone would just acknowledge it was wrong. She thought about the word coordinated. She thought about what coordinated meant, not a protocol that was carelessly discriminatory, not a complaint mechanism that had been negligently designed to require no specificity. Something worse. A system being actively used, with intention, with a gate supervisor who knew a complainant by name and spoke to her before boarding about needing one more before the month closes. One more. As if there were a quota. As if there were a number. Her hand was tight on the phone. She made herself loosen it. Mr. Sen, why are you telling me this? A long pause. Because I've done this work for 11 years, and I've told myself the thing that people in this work tell themselves, that I'm just gathering information, that what the client does with it is not my responsibility, that I'm a neutral instrument. His voice went quieter. And then I sat outside your sister's building for 3 hours and watched a woman who had done nothing except write an accurate report, go home with a dog and a bag of groceries. And I thought about the February footage sitting in a file marked non-responsive, and I decided I was done being a neutral instrument. She stood in the middle of Drennan Regional Airport and breathed. The footage. Where is it? I made copies before I resigned. They're on an encrypted drive. I retained an attorney Thursday afternoon. She's prepared to produce them to the DOT Inspector General's office under a whistleblower protection filing. He paused. I'm not asking you for anything, Ms. Voss. I'm telling you so that when it surfaces, and it will surface, the filing goes in today, you're not caught off guard, and because you deserve to know what was done. She thought about what to say. There were several things available to her, ranging from functional to something more honest. She chose honest. Thank you, she said. That's not nothing what you just did. It's late, he said. But it's what I had. She called Obi before she got to baggage claim. He picked up immediately, which meant he was already in his office on a Sunday, which no longer surprised her. She told him what Sen had said precisely and in sequence. He was quiet for the duration and then said, his attorney's filing will trigger an automatic preservation order on Alderton's full engagement records. Everything they touched, the billing records we subpoenaed, the surveillance logs, the footage, all of it becomes legally protected from destruction within the hour. What does the audio mean? For Fell? It means the February incident wasn't a passenger complaint. It means it was an orchestrated removal, which means Harlow Air's Mountain West division was running a program, not a careless protocol, a deliberate program, to generate a pattern of removals that would give the airline grounds to challenge the travel rights of specific passengers. He paused. We don't know the full scope yet, but if there are logs, if someone was tracking one more before the month closes, then there are records, and those records are now going to be found. The settlement addressed the policy. What Sen is describing is potentially criminal conduct. Those are two different tracks, and they don't cancel each other out. His voice had taken on the particular focused quality of a man who has been handed the last piece of something he's been building for a long time. Amelia, go home. Let me work. She went home. Her apartment in Drennan was exactly as she'd left it. Clean, because she'd cleaned it before leaving. Sparse because she hadn't fully furnished it yet. quiet in the way that apartments are quiet when no one has been in them for 10 days. She put her bag down. She stood in the kitchen and looked at the refrigerator and thought about what was probably in it and decided on toast, which was achievable and sufficient. She ate standing at the counter, the way she'd eaten 100 meals in forward operating bases and break rooms, and every space that was functional rather than comfortable. She thought about the footage, about the gate supervisor and the woman in 18C, and the phrase "one more" before the month closes, about what it meant that someone had been running a count. She didn't sleep much that night, not because she was anxious, she'd moved past the anxious phase somewhere over Western Virginia, but because her mind was doing the thing it did when it had more information than it had yet fully processed, running through the implications in the quiet, methodical way that felt less like worry and more like work. She let it run. It was better than trying to stop it. Monday morning, she went back to her shift at Callaway Regional. She got there 7 minutes early. She changed into her scrubs in the locker room. She walked onto the floor and Marcus looked up from the intake desk and said, "Welcome back," and handed her a breakfast burrito, which was cold because he'd apparently bought it an hour ago in anticipation of her arrival, which was both thoughtful and slightly illogical, which was entirely consistent with Marcus. "Thank you," she said. "How's your knee?" "Fine." "How's the other thing?" She looked at him. "Still moving." He nodded like that was the answer he'd expected. "Dr. Voss wants to see you at 10. Heads up." She saw 8 patients before 10. A 43-year-old with a suspected DVT that turned out to be confirmed. She caught the asymmetrical calf swelling on intake that the attending had initially attributed to a muscle strain, flagged it, ordered the ultrasound, and had the anticoagulation protocol started before the hour was out, which was the kind of work that didn't make anyone famous and kept people from dying, which was the work she'd trained for and the work she was good at. She did it with the same attention she'd brought to the incident report and the testimony and the phone call with Sen. Full attention, no reservation, the thing in front of her receiving everything she had. Dr. Voss's office was small and aggressively organized, the desk clear except for the things that were currently relevant, the walls holding certificates and a whiteboard with the week's staffing grid. Voss was standing when Amelia came in, which was unusual. She almost always sat. "Close the door," Voss said. Amelia closed it. "I had a call this morning from the DOT Inspector General's communications office." Voss's voice was in its administrative register, but underneath it was something that wasn't quite professional, something that Amelia had heard once or twice before from her supervisor and recognized as the register Voss used when she was trying not to show that something mattered to her. "They're issuing a formal commendation, to you, to be entered into the Federal Review record." She paused. "They called it an exemplary demonstration of professional documentation and civic responsibility under institutional pressure." Another pause. "Which is a government way of saying you did the right thing when it was hard." Amelia looked at her. "I also want to say something that is not part of any official record," Voss continued. "When you called me from Washington and told me what was happening, when you called ahead of time, before anything became public, because you wanted me to hear it from you directly, that was the right call. Not just strategically, as a person." She looked at Amelia with the specific directness of someone who doesn't offer this kind of statement often and means it precisely. "I've had nurses on this floor for 20 years. Most of them, when something hard happens, they manage it alone until they can't. You didn't do that. You kept people informed. You asked for what you needed." A pause. "That's harder than it sounds." Amelia thought about the 11 minutes in the Kael Valley with the power out, about the plan that lived in people's heads because they'd thought about it without talking about it, about what it might have looked like if they'd talked about it out loud instead. "I had good people around me," she said. "You also had to choose to use them." Voss sat down. "You're back on full rotation. If anyone on this staff gives you trouble about the press coverage or the case, you tell me before you handle it yourself. That's not optional. That's an instruction." She picked up her pen, which was the signal that the conversation was transitioning back to function. "Now go finish your shift. You have a patient in 7 who needs a wound redress and the attending is running late." The criminal referral from the DOT Inspector General's office landed on a Tuesday, 2 weeks after Amelia's return to Drennan. It named 4 individuals. Gordon Priel, former SVP of Operations. Warren Galt, former board director. a Harlow Air Regional Operations Manager named Deb Suter, who had administered what the referral described as a systematic passenger disruption program out of the Mountain West Division, and the Alderton and Mace supervising partner who had ordered the February footage filed as non-responsive. The referral was not a conviction. It was the beginning of a process that would take time and involve lawyers and produce outcomes that were still months away. But it was public, filed in the Federal Record and reported by Simone Frey at the National Transport Observer within hours of the filing, then picked up by 3 national outlets by the following morning. The phrase systematic passenger disruption program appeared in the headline of 2 of them. Amelia read the articles on her lunch break, sitting in the break room with a sandwich she'd actually made that morning, which felt like a minor victory. The Suter detail was the one that stayed with her longest. Deb Suter, whose name she hadn't known until the referral, whose existence she hadn't known until the referral, had apparently managed a spreadsheet. An actual spreadsheet, tracked monthly, with columns that included removal date, flight number, passenger demographic data, and a column labeled Justification Classification that contained codes that corresponded to categories of complaint. The spreadsheet had been on a shared drive in the Mountain West Operations folder. Alderton had it. Sen had photographed it before he resigned. The IG's office had it now, and what it showed was that over 14 months, 31 passengers had been removed from Harlow air flights through the Mountain West Division under complaint protocols that had been, in a significant number of cases, initiated or coordinated by airline staff rather than by genuine passenger concerns. 31 people. 31 incidents that most of them had probably tried to report or decided not to report, or filed a form about that went unanswered, or accepted a travel credit and gone home carrying something they didn't have words for because what happened to them was real, and the institution that did it gave them no language to describe why. She thought about those 31 people for a long time. She thought about the ones whose names she'd never know, who hadn't had a Terrence Obie call them 40 minutes after their incident report hit the system, who hadn't had a Bridget Kwan, who hadn't had a Darius Fell to sit across from in a coffee shop and recognize the shape of a shared experience. She thought about what it cost to carry something when no one official acknowledges it happened, when the institution responsible calls it a protocol and offers you a voucher and moves on. This was the thing that the commendation and the settlement and the criminal referral didn't fully address, and she knew it, and she held that knowledge alongside the rest of it, not as a reason to dismiss what had been accomplished, but as a reason to understand its limits. You could change a policy. You could freeze a contract. You could put 4 names in a federal referral and run a compliance monitor for 2 years. What you couldn't do, through any of those mechanisms, was give back the thing that was taken from the 31 people on Deb Suter's spreadsheet, the ordinary expectation that they would be treated as people rather than problems, that their presence in a seat they'd paid for was not subject to the mood or the agenda of whoever happened to be watching. That expectation, the expectation of being treated as a person, wasn't a legal instrument. It wasn't a policy revision. It was something that had to be chosen in individual moments by individual people with the authority to make a different decision than the easy one. Briggs could have asked for specifics. The flight attendant could have said the complaint wasn't actionable. Fitch could have read the situation in the fluorescent room and understood that what was happening there was wrong. None of them did. The protocol gave them cover not to, and they took it. That was the thing the criminal referral named in legal language: systematic, coordinated, documented. But what it actually was, underneath the legal language, was simpler and older and harder to fix. The willingness to decide that someone doesn't deserve the same consideration as everyone else, and then to build a system around that willingness so it looks like procedure. 6 weeks after the settlement, the Senate Commerce Committee published its final review findings, 43 pages, publicly available, containing the full account of the DOT review, the 3 named complainant incidents, the committee session testimony, the Alderton engagement records, and the governance documentation that showed Warren Galt's approval signature on the original complaint protocol 2 years prior. It also contained in an appendix the letter from Harlow Air's CEO that used the word wrong twice. Senator Price held a brief press availability when the findings were released. He was asked whether the committee would recommend further legislation. He said the committee was evaluating a framework for federal aviation contractor conduct standards that would require complaint protocols to meet a specificity threshold before removal actions could be taken. He was precise and cautious in the way of someone who had been doing this long enough to know the distance between a committee recommendation and an enacted law, but the framework was in motion, and motion was not nothing. Darius Fell called her that afternoon. "Have you read it?" "Most of it." "Page 31, he said. "The footnote." She found page 31. The footnote was a citation in the committee's description of the February incident's significance to the overall pattern. It read, "The complainant's pre-board conversation, captured on terminal audio and authenticated by the OIG's forensic team, constitutes documented evidence of coordinated removal activity, predating the formal complaint mechanism, establishing that the airline's protocol was not merely negligently designed but was adapted to serve as cover for deliberate conduct." Adapted to serve as cover, Fell said. That's what 9 months of form responses was protecting. Yes. And Souter's spreadsheet. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. I keep thinking about the others, the ones who aren't named. So do I. Is there anything, is the referral going to address them? Does anyone contact them? Obi told me the IG's office is working to notify the individuals identified on Souter's spreadsheet, those who can be reached. Some of the incidents are old enough that contact information has changed. She paused. It's not going to be complete. It's not going to find everyone. No, he said. It won't. A pause. Does that make you angry? She thought about that honestly. Yes, she said. It makes me angry, and I'm choosing not to let the anger be the last thing. Because if the anger is the last thing, then I'm still in the security office at Harlow International, and I need to not be there anymore. He was quiet for a moment. How do you do that? One shift at a time, she said, same as anything else. The DOJ formally charged Gordon Priel, Warren Galt, Deb Souter, and the Alderton partner, a man named Russell Fain, on a Monday morning in December. The charges included conspiracy to interfere with passengers' civil rights, obstruction of a federal proceeding, and in Fain's case, destruction of evidence, though technically the evidence hadn't been destroyed because Sen had photographed it, which meant Fain's instruction to file it as non-responsive had constituted an attempt rather than a completed act, a distinction that his attorney was presumably already preparing to build a defense around. Amelia learned about the charges from Marcus, who texted her a news link at 7:15 a.m. while she was driving to her shift. She pulled over to read it, which she knew was a driving safety violation, and did anyway because some things warrant stopping. She read the lead twice. She sat in her car on the Drennan Road with the engine running and the heater on in the Colorado morning outside her windows. Cold, clear, the kind of sky that looks like someone cleaned it overnight. She thought about Petra Galt. She hadn't thought about her in a while, which was interesting. The woman who'd started all of this had faded into the background of a story that had become about something much larger than a first-class seat on a flight from Denver to Washington. The investigation had never formally named Petra Galt as a participant in the systematic program. The February 4th complainant, the woman in 18C who'd spoken to the gate supervisor about one more before the month closes, was a different person, someone connected to the Mountain West operations through channels the DOJ was still tracing. Whether Petra Galt had known what she was participating in when she made her complaint, or whether she'd simply used a mechanism that existed and found it served her purposes, was a question the investigation hadn't answered publicly and might never answer to Amelia's satisfaction. She'd decided to leave that one unresolved, not because it didn't matter, but because she understood by now that demanding clean answers to questions about human motivation was a way of postponing the ability to move forward. People did things for reasons that were mixed and self-serving and sometimes not fully visible even to themselves. What you could hold people accountable for was conduct, what they did, not the complete internal story of why. The conduct was in the record. That had to be enough. She put the car back in drive. She went to work. The commendation from the DOT Inspector General's office arrived in physical form in mid-December, a letter, signed, on official stationery, that she read once and put in the folder with the incident report and the legal pad pages and Sen's note and the folded printed screenshot of the charity gala where Petra Galt stood next to her husband in a photograph that had, in its small way, been the first thread she'd pulled. She didn't frame it. She didn't tell most people about it. Marcus knew, and Voss knew, and Prue knew, and that was enough. What she did do, in December, was apply for a position. The application had been sitting in her browser as a draft for 3 weeks before she submitted it. She kept opening it, reading it, closing it without sending, which was unlike her, which told her the hesitation was worth paying attention to. The position was with the DOT's Office of Aviation Consumer Protection, newly restructured in the wake of the Harlow Air Review, hiring clinical and operational consultants to advise on passenger complaint mechanism standards. Part-time, remote eligible, advisory capacity. The listing specified that applicants with backgrounds in military medical operations and civilian clinical practice would be given particular consideration for the institutional knowledge they brought to high-pressure decision-making protocols. She recognized Obi's language in that specification. She called him. "Did you write that listing?" she asked. "I may have had input on the qualification criteria," he said, with the dry precision that was his version of a smile. "Terrence." "Amelia. I am a nurse. I'm not a policy consultant. You spent 10 days demonstrating that you understand complex federal oversight processes, institutional accountability mechanisms, and the specific points at which complaint protocols fail the people they're supposed to protect." A pause. "The people writing the new standards have the policy language. What they don't have is someone who knows what it feels like when the protocol fails at 30,000 feet. Another pause. "We're not asking you to stop being a nurse. We're asking you to help us make sure the system works for the next person who is." She looked at the application on her screen, at the draft she'd written and rewritten and not sent, at the blank where her cover letter was supposed to go, which she hadn't been able to fill in because she kept starting it too formally, as if she were trying to sound like someone the position would take seriously instead of just saying what was true. She deleted the draft. She wrote a new one. It took 18 minutes, and she changed 3 words and sent it before she could change anything else. She got the position in January. She flew back to Washington in February for her first advisory meeting. Different airline. She'd researched the complaint protocol before booking, old habit, new application, and found it met the specificity threshold that Price's committee framework had outlined. It wasn't law yet, but the airline had adopted it voluntarily, which was either principled or strategic and probably both, and either way the threshold was there. She booked coach. Window seat. Her knee would ache, and that was fine. The flight was uneventful in every way a flight should be uneventful. On time, unremarkable, full of ordinary people going ordinary places. She read for the first hour. She looked out the window for the second. The cloud cover was thin enough that she could see the terrain below, the particular geometry of the country from altitude, roads and fields, and the dark lines of rivers, and the grid of small cities, everything that looked random from the ground, resolving into pattern from up here. She thought about the 31 people on Souter's spreadsheet. She thought about what it would mean if the framework Price's committee was building became law, if the specificity threshold became a national standard, if the next nurse or doctor or veteran who closed their eyes on a plane had the protection of a protocol that required a real answer to the question, what, specifically, did this person do? She thought about the gap between what that protection would be and what it would feel like, the distance between a policy and the human moment inside the policy, and she knew the gap would still be there, would always be there, because the gap was where people lived, in the space between what the rules said and what the person with the authority decided to do. You couldn't close that gap entirely. You could make it harder to exploit. You could build systems that required more from the person in the moment than an instinct and a cover story. You could make the cost of a careless decision visible enough that it wasn't easy to call nothing. That was the work. It wasn't clean, and it wasn't finished, and it would never be finished, and she was starting to understand that this was not a failure of the work, but a description of it. The same way clinical practice was never finished, the same way you never fully solved the problem of keeping people alive, you just kept showing up and doing the best available thing with what you had. The plane began its descent. Washington resolved below the clouds, the particular skyline of it, the monuments and the river, the geography of a city that had been the center of this particular story and would go on being the center of other stories after hers was over. She looked at it and felt the ordinary mix of things, tired, present, not fully resolved, moving forward anyway. She thought about what she would say if someone asked her what the lesson was. She'd been asked variations of that question several times in the past months, by journalists, by Quan, by a veterans advocacy organization that had reached out after the committee findings were published, by Prue, who asked it in the specific way that Prue asked things, which was directly and without pretense, and because she actually wanted to know. What she'd learned to say was this: the lesson wasn't that speaking up always works, because it doesn't, and anyone who tells you it does is selling a cleaner story than the real one. The lesson was that silence has a cost too, a cost that's harder to see because it's distributed across time, across all the people who come after you, and encounter the same system unchanged, because no one made the system visible. You document. You report. You refuse to let it be treated as nothing, not because you're certain it will matter, but because you know with certainty that it can't matter if it's not on record. The incident report doesn't guarantee the outcome. It makes the outcome possible. And the other thing, the harder thing, the one she was still working out, was about what you do with the version of yourself that comes out the other side. Because she was not the same person who had boarded Flight 408 with a bad knee and a window seat and 19 hours of tired. Not because she'd been transformed by the experience into something better. She distrusted that framing, the narrative where the crucible produces a purer version of you because it made suffering sound like a design feature. She was the same person with the same flaws and the same reprimand in her file and the same tendency to let coffee go cold while things happened around it. What was different was that she understood more precisely what she was willing to do with what she knew. She was willing to stay in the room. That was it, in the plainest terms. She was willing to stay in the fluorescent room and ask the question that required a real answer and write it all down before she left, and then to keep going when the system pushed back, and to understand that pushing back was not evidence that she was wrong, but evidence that she'd found something the system wanted to keep easy. The wheels touched the tarmac. The plane slowed. Around her, people began moving in the way that people always move at the end of a flight, reaching for bags, checking phones, reassembling themselves for wherever they were going. She stayed still for a moment, the way she always stayed still for a moment, letting the moving happen around her while she finished the thought she was in. The thought was this: she had boarded a plane 10 days ago as a nurse trying to visit her sister. She was landing now as a nurse who was also something else. Not a hero, not a symbol, not the name on a commendation letter. Just a person who had stayed in the room when it was easier to leave, and had written it down, and had kept going, and had found, slowly, imperfectly, with a lot of cold coffee and a bad knee and 4 hours of sleep on the good nights, that staying in the room was itself a kind of strength. Not the loud kind. Not the kind that gets recognized in the moment. The kind that compounds quietly, that shows up in the work that comes after, that exists in the changed policy and the notified victim, and the standard that makes the next person's room a little less fluorescent and a little less designed to be survived alone. She picked up her bag. She stood. She walked off the plane and into the terminal, and the terminal was the ordinary organized chaos of every airport she'd ever been in, and nobody looked at her, and she was just a woman with a carry-on walking toward whatever came next. That was exactly right. That was exactly what she'd wanted to be. She walked out of the gate and into the corridor and toward the exit, and the city was outside and the work was ahead, and she kept going.